You're listening to Real Life, No Filter, where raw emotions and real moments take center stage. No masks, no filters. Just honest stories about life, love, and everything in between. Get comfortable. We're about to begin. Sarah strode purposefully down the pristine white hospital corridor. Urgent paperwork awaited completion. Today promised to be demanding. Two complex surgeries, one of which was for a little girl whose family was bound to her by long, painful ties. She wished she could erase that period from memory. It held too much bitterness, injustice, fear, and resentment. It seemed it was all behind her. A new chapter in Sarah's life had opened, and the past, it seemed, no longer held power over her. However, the past had recently reminded her of itself. But this time the encounter was different. The very same people were sitting in the office. It was as if an icy wave washed over Sarah. She recognized them instantly, although years separated the young girl with the light backpack, who had once left her parental home from the woman she was today. Both had changed, but Sarah's memory could not erase them. The conversation was long and difficult. They didn't make accusations, though there was ample cause for them. It was simply that a great misfortune had befallen them. And how could one not believe in the boomerang of fate? Alas, this boomerang had also struck a completely innocent being, a little person. It was this child, this girl, who needed help. Sarah, an experienced doctor, had encountered similar cases and knew how to act. That night, after the meeting, sleep was slow to come. Her children had long since drifted into deep sleep in their cozy bedrooms, and her beloved husband breathed steadily and deeply beside her. Sarah tossed and turned in bed, memories flooding in unbidden, appearing before her eyes in vivid scenes from past years. Sarah barely remembered her own mother. She knew she existed, but the girl was only 4 years old when her dearest person was gone. Her father spoke of her mother, though reluctantly, as memories of his first wife caused him pain. As she grew up, Sarah noticed a shadow of sadness in his eyes when her mother was mentioned. And then Carol appeared in their home. Sarah was 7 when this woman entered their life, and immediately took the place of the rightful mistress. Her stepmother could not tolerate any mention of her predecessor, so her father remained silent, not wishing to upset his new wife. There was another close soul, Aunt Helen, her mother's cousin. She lived in another city, but from childhood, Sarah spent a week or two with her during holidays. And before Helen moved, they saw each other much more often. That was a happy time. Aunt Helen took the girl to theatres and museums. They walked, laughed, and had long conversations. Aunt Helen's son, Michael, already a high school student then, helped his younger cousin with math, carried her around the city on his strong shoulders, and sometimes took her with him on walks. All his friends, especially the girls, were warm towards Sarah. It was wonderful. But Carol couldn't stand Aunt Helen. Even little Sarah felt this. Her stepmother spoke ill of her, with undisguised contempt. Aunt Helen was not welcome in their home, and this saddened and surprised the girl. How could anyone not love Aunt Helen? She was so kind, cheerful, and good. Aunt Helen often told Sarah about her mother, mostly funny stories from their shared childhood and youth. The cousins were inseparable. They went through a lot together, joyful and sad, funny and dangerous. Aunt Helen sincerely admired Lizzie, and Sarah loved listening to these stories and looking at photographs that preserved the memory of the dearest person she didn't remember at all. "How happy your mother was about your birth." Aunt Helen smiled, looking at Sarah. "She was simply flying on wings. We made so many plans about how we would raise you, develop you, educate you. You had such tiny fingers, thin, as if already skillful. Your mother dreamed that you would become a surgeon, that you would save people. She had a weak heart from childhood, a complex defect, and no one could cure her. And she really wanted her daughter to help people like herself, to make them healthy and happy. By the way, it didn't escape Sarah's notice that Aunt Helen herself was quite cool towards Carol, and towards her father too. Aunt Helen didn't say anything directly, but the girl noticed changes in the tone of her voice, in the expression of her eyes. Sarah worried. Why did the adults who meant so much to her dislike each other so much, barely restraining themselves when they met to avoid saying nasty things? Carol constantly found reasons for dissatisfaction. Sarah came home at the wrong time, or was dressed incorrectly for a walk, or hadn't learned all her lessons during the holidays. The nitpicking was endless. Gradually, communication with Aunt Helen became less frequent, and then some scandal occurred between the adults, and the connection was completely severed. Aunt Helen called only once after that quarrel. Carol graciously allowed them to talk. "Little one, don't think I'm abandoning you," Aunt Helen said. "It's just how circumstances are. You're still small. You won't understand. You know my address. If anything happens, be sure to come. I'll help you in a difficult moment. Remember this, you can always count on me." And that was it. That was their last conversation. After that, nothing. Carol explained that Aunt Helen had her own affairs, saying her son was applying to university, she had work problems, she didn't have time for her niece. But Sarah understood everything. She heard Aunt Helen call the home number, but Carol picked up and spoke to her rudely without calling Sarah. One day, Sarah saw Aunt Helen from the car window. She was standing in their yard. She waved to her, but Carol distracted her, and the car sped away, leaving Aunt Helen behind. Apparently, her aunt was trying to meet her niece, which was not easy, as she lived in another city, had to leave her affairs and travel. But her father and stepmother did everything to prevent Sarah from communicating with Aunt Helen. They were united in their dislike. At first, without contact with her beloved Aunt Helen, the only one who supported and understood her, it was very difficult for Sarah. At home, things were far from rosy. Her father and stepmother had a daughter, Chloe. At first, Sarah was even happy. A charming baby, a sister, a living doll. But the joy quickly faded. Firstly, Sarah suddenly saw the tenderness and love parents could shower on a certain child. Her father worked a lot, so he couldn't give his older daughter as much attention as she would have liked. Sometimes he asked about school, about how she felt, but it was clear he wasn't very interested in the answers. And when Sarah asked him to play with her, to carry her on his back like Michael, Aunt Helen's son, to walk in the park, or even play football, he waved her off. His gaze was distant, as if, while talking to his daughter, he was floating somewhere far away. Carol simply irritated Sarah. The girl tried to behave impeccably to earn her favor. She did her homework, cleaned, played quietly and unobtrusively. But Carol always found something to scold her stepdaughter for. This wasn't right. That wasn't right. And again, that look from Carol, at an annoying hindrance. It was impossible not to notice, and the girl had been so drawn to her at first. She wanted what others had: joint shopping trips, heartfelt conversations, cooking together. But Carol avoided such interaction in every way. However, she did fulfill her parental duties. From the outside, no one could accuse Carol of mistreating the girl. And then Chloe was born, and Sarah saw her father and Carol from a completely different perspective, realizing they could be like that: loving, caring, attentive. Just not with her, but with Chloe. Chloe's smile, her cooing, her first skills, everything brought delight to her parents. They could spend hours admiring their daughter as she played in her playpen or simply slept. They stood over her crib, happy, exchanging glances. They even spent their last money on lavish birthday parties for Chloe, buying the very best of everything. Sarah, on the other hand, received things on a residual basis. The smallest successes of her younger sister were praised as genius, while Sarah, no matter how hard she tried, couldn't earn even modest praise. She was an excellent student, getting straight A's, but this was taken for granted. The pain came precisely from this contrast. No, Sarah didn't envy her sister's dolls and outfits. She wasn't naked herself. The matter was different. Her parents always listened to Chloe with genuine interest. They enjoyed spending time with her. They were happy with her answers. And Sarah? She felt like an outsider in this family, completely foreign. Her father sometimes tried to talk to his older daughter, seemingly heart to heart. It was clear he was making an effort, and he wasn't really very interested in hearing about her life. Carol, however, didn't hide her irritation towards her stepdaughter at all, and this became more and more obvious over the years. Later, Sarah guessed that it was Carol who turned her father against her, only telling him bad things, portraying her in an unfavorable light. She did this skillfully and subtly. Her husband had no idea of her intentions, especially since he was almost never home. He worked a lot. He was even grateful to his new wife for helping him, raising, nurturing, and cherishing his child. Her father went away for work shifts, and Sarah lived for months only with Carol and Chloe, feeling like a stranger in her own apartment. Sarah gradually gained more responsibilities. She had to clean the rooms before Carol came home from work, go to the store, cook dinner, and take Chloe to clubs and activities. 90% of the time, Chloe was too young to get to her activities on her own, so Sarah accompanied her, in addition to her household chores and studies. They were assigned a lot in high school. Sarah was used to doing everything conscientiously, so she stayed up late, with almost no time for rest. Sarah tried to talk to Carol, to explain how difficult it was for her to live under such a regime. Of course, it didn't yield results. "You're just lazy," Carol sighed. "Like most modern teenagers. But we, your parents, are responsible for your upbringing and are doing everything for your own good." It was useless to approach her father at all. He was subtly influenced by Carol and felt grateful to her for raising his daughter so well, instilling a love for work with reasonable strictness. Her father sincerely believed that it was Carol who deserved thanks for Sarah not hanging around in yards with other teenagers, not drinking beer on benches, not smoking. "You'll appreciate it later," he explained to his older daughter when she tried to talk about her dreams. "You just don't understand, because of your age, what Carol is doing for you. She's preparing you for adult life." For adult life? Sarah wanted to cry from resentment. She wasn't little anymore and knew what she wanted to become: a surgeon, preferably a cardiac surgeon, to learn how to treat those others considered hopeless. But getting into medical academy wasn't easy. It would be good to attend university courses. Sarah talked to her parents, trying to convey how important these courses were to her. "But you know, we're not doing very well with money right now." Carol shook her head. "And these courses of yours are expensive. We can't afford them. And besides, maybe you won't even need it. Today you want to be a doctor, tomorrow a ballerina, and we have to pay for these whims when we're already short on money." And that was the pure truth. Her father had problems at work. His salary had decreased significantly and was often delayed. The family lived on previous savings. But money for Chloe's activities was always found. and birthdays were celebrated, and dresses were bought, and treats. Her parents saved on everything except their adored younger daughter, and it was difficult to forbid Chloe anything. The slightest thing would trigger tears, tantrums, scandals, awful scenes with snot smearing and stomping tiny feet. Her father would call Chloe his princess at such moments and hug her tight. Carol also doted on her. All the little princess's wishes were immediately fulfilled. Her parents couldn't bear to see her tears, couldn't refuse her anything. She wasn't Sarah, after all. When the older girl tried to explain to her stepmother and father how she saw the situation, she ended up being blamed. "You don't understand that she's a child," her father said sternly. "A little child who doesn't yet understand financial problems. The little one must have a happy childhood. It's all your spoiled nature, and innate selfishness too," Carol said, pursing her lips and looking at Sarah. "You're so grown up, and you don't understand anything. It's your jealousy, pathological. No, we missed something in your upbringing somewhere." Every time Sarah tried to talk about something with her stepmother or father, she ended up being blamed, feeling misunderstood and rejected. Of course, the Medical Academy preparatory courses were not paid for. The girl's desire was considered a whim, and she was advised to study better. How could she study better? She already had straight A's, despite the excessive workload at home. By the way, Carol also considered Sarah's academic success her own achievement, claiming it was she who had instilled a love for work in Sarah. It was graduation year. A little more, and school would be behind her. Sarah still hoped to get into medical academy. The courses weren't paid for, so she prepared herself. Fortunately, there was a lot of free literature online. Money was still tight in the family, but things seemed to be getting better. Her father found a new job, though again involving long business trips. He had gone away for work shifts before, but now he was gone for 3 or 4 months at a time. But the salary promised to be more than decent. Carol was happy about this. Chloe started school. Now Sarah had another duty, to do homework with her sister. It wasn't easy. Firstly, Chloe had grown up very capricious. The slightest thing would bring tears, minimal difficulties caused tantrums. She cried, complained to her mother, who pitied her, and asked Sarah to be gentler with the little one. How much gentler could she be? Secondly, Chloe, how to put it, had difficulty with academics, and she was restless. In short, Sarah worked up a sweat before her sister's homework was finished. And only then did the girl start on her own assignments, staying up late again, and almost falling asleep in class in the morning. From Carol, Sarah still received only reproaches and complaints. Despite the fact that the girl did so much for her stepmother, helped around the house, raised Chloe, Carol showed no gratitude. She continued to see her stepdaughter as an obstacle without whom everyone would be better off. And now Sarah had grown up, become smarter, and started to understand a lot. This drove Carol completely mad. Her stepmother didn't hide that she dreamed of the day Sarah would go off on her own, fly out of the nest. She told her husband that life would improve and be completely different after their older daughter grew up. That is, even her father saw Sarah as some annoying obstacle. Sometimes the girl shared her worries with her classmate Olivia. She was quiet, intelligent, even wise despite her young age. Young herself, but with a soul that seemed old and had seen much. "Your stepmother is a typical stepmother." Olivia shook her head, listening to Sarah. "But it's okay. Life is like that. It will put everything in its place. You'll see. You'll remember my words. And you yourself will stand firm. And everything will be wonderful for you with such a strong core." Her classmates' words were encouraging, instilled hope for a bright future, and gave her strength to live. Sarah did not give up on her dream. She wanted to be a surgeon and did everything possible for it. And she knew, after school, she would take her documents to the medical academy. The academy was only 3 stops from her home. She could walk. A tall, old building in the center. The girl often walked past it in the stream of young men and women hurrying to this temple of science. This was her dream. And now the diploma was in her hands, red, of special distinction, and even a gold medal, a mark of excellence. Sarah was happy and proud of herself. She didn't go to the graduation party. Carol said there was no money for it yet. But Sarah herself wasn't really eager to go to the restaurant. She wasn't even very upset. Well, Carol said that evening on the day the diploma was awarded. Her father, as usual, was away on a business trip. Now you are an adult. You're almost 18. We've raised you all these years, given you everything: clothes, food, a roof over your head. The moment has come for you to fly out of the parental nest. Where? Sarah didn't understand. Where? To work, of course. What studies? Sarah, leave these silly fantasies. Stop dreaming about the impossible. Medical academy? Do you know the competition there? I checked. 12 people per place. You won't get in. Don't even dream about it. Well, I prepared and I feel I have the strength. That's just your overconfidence talking. You'll never get into such a university. Something simpler, of course, is within your reach. But think, that's another 5 years of study, and you need to work. I need to study. Sarah looked at her medal. I'm good at it. School is one thing. Carol began to get angry, but tried to hide it for now. But this is university. In school, they gave you grades for effort. In university, you'll have to study for real. There will be no time for anything else. And you're already an adult. You should support yourself. Especially since we're short on money right now. Supporting a grown girl for several more years is an excessive burden for us. I'll talk to your father. I already talked to him, and he completely agrees with me. Sarah, it's not worth spending years studying. It's nonsense in our situation. Later, people with these same diplomas stand at cash registers alongside those who didn't finish university. I know this for a fact. Carol herself worked as a cashier. She had an unfinished law college degree and often spoke maliciously about her cashier colleagues with degrees in economics and law. You just don't know life yet, she lectured her stepdaughter. No universities, no courses, and no buts. I've already arranged it. I have a friend who's a chief accountant at a housing association. They need a janitor. It's not bad for a start. The most important thing is they provide employees with housing for next to nothing from the reserve fund. So you can move out tomorrow and start your own life. And then Sarah got angry. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to speak to her stepmother like this. You have no right to decide my fate. I will be a surgeon. That's for sure. It's my dream, and you are no longer in charge of me. You've humiliated me my whole life. Do you think I don't see or understand anything? Sarah was truly furious. She had never spoken to her parents like this. She simply hadn't dared. But now, all the accumulated resentment seemed to burst out. The girl shouted about her feelings, about the injustice, and strangely, she felt lighter. She understood that after this, everything would change. Oh, you ungrateful wretch! Carol looked at her stepdaughter with unconcealed hatred. Get out of here, since you're so smart and independent. This is my home too, Sarah calmly reminded her. Mine and father's. You have no right to kick me out, but I'll leave myself gladly. She started packing her things. She took little: money, documents, clothes for the first while. It made a small, light backpack. Just right. Sarah knew where to go, although she couldn't guess what awaited her there. After all, she hadn't spoken to Aunt Helen for so many years. But something told her. She would be welcomed at Helen's house, greeted just like in childhood, supported, helped, comforted, given strength to fulfill her dream. She should have gone there long ago instead of enduring the mockery. She left the apartment without looking back. Carol didn't even turn around. Sarah had no doubt. Of course, she would tell her father and portray her as always, rude, ungrateful, almost a criminal. Her father would believe her. He believed every word his wife said. It was easier, more convenient for him. Well, it was time to admit that even her own father didn't understand or accept his daughter. He had made his choice. Nothing connected Sarah to this family anymore. Well, except for a shared inheritance, of course, but it was too early to think about that. The waiting room. She bought a ticket to Aunt Helen's city easily, without problems. The intercity bus was leaving in half an hour. Sarah took this stroke of luck as a good sign and smiled. Although she was trembling from the emotions and anxiety she had experienced, the girl was almost sure. Her story would end well, and right now, exactly now, she was taking an important and right step. Aunt Helen was surprised to see her niece on the doorstep, but recognized her immediately, even though they hadn't seen each other since Sarah was about 10 years old. They hugged. Finding herself in the arms of a loved one, the girl finally let herself go. She burst into tears. Then they drank tea in the kitchen and talked. Sarah told her about her life. Aunt Helen listened, shaking her head, sighing. "Listen," she said, when Sarah had finished speaking. "You're staying with me. There's a medical academy in our city too. If you don't get in now, you can prepare for a year, and then you'll definitely get in next year." "I'd really like to, but Father, what if he doesn't allow it?" "You'll be 18 in a week. You can choose where to live yourself," Aunt Helen reminded her. "I won't let you go back there. I didn't realize how hard life was for you there. If I had known, I would have taken you through court long ago." Aunt Helen told her how Carol had forbidden her to communicate with Sarah and had also turned her father against her. But that wasn't difficult. He's been under her thumb for a long time. She convinced him that I was a bad influence on you, that I was saying bad things about them. And I called you often and even came to visit. But they wouldn't let me in, wouldn't let me see you, and the gifts I bought were returned to me. I followed your life on social media. Sometimes Carol posted photos where you appeared, sometimes your father. But I never found your page. I thought we could at least communicate through messengers. But no, they didn't allow it. They didn't allow me to have social media accounts when I was a teenager. They said it took up too much time. And children shouldn't be on the internet. There are many scammers there. And then, when I got older, I didn't want to myself. Perhaps your parents were afraid that I would keep in touch with you," Aunt Helen mused. "Hence the prohibitions." "And why? Why did they always treat you so badly?" "Well, there's a reason." Aunt Helen smiled mysteriously. "You're an adult now. I'll tell you the story. And you'll understand everything." Lizzie and Helen were cousins, more than sisters, best friends. They stayed overnight at each other's places constantly, went to school together, hung out. Later, when they were older, they went to discos. Lizzie and Helen had no secrets from each other. They shared their deepest thoughts. Lizzie had a weak heart from childhood. She was often in the hospital. Helen would rush to her best friend, right after school. The doctors knew her and always let her in, even if it wasn't visiting hours. The adults, observing the sisters' friendship, joked, "What if you fall in love with the same guy? And that's the end of your friendship." The girls declared in unison that would never happen, and it didn't. Helen was the first to get married, to a guy from university, tall, stately, smart, kind. Lizzie approved of her sister's choice. "You will be happy." They were indeed happy, though not for long. Helen soon became a young widow. Her husband drowned saving two teenagers at the city beach. He pushed the boys out, but he himself. Helen was a very young mother then. Her son, Michael, had just turned 2. Of course, Lizzie was there for the inconsolable Helen during that difficult time. She even stayed at her sister's apartment for a while, looking after her, little Mikey, trying to cheer her up, distract her. Time passed. Helen slowly but surely began to recover. Life seemed to settle down, become stable. Of course, she grieved for her husband, but she finally remembered herself. Lizzie was happy for her sister, as she had been seriously worried about her condition for a long time. Then Lizzie also got married, to David, a man a little older than her, serious, steady. He earned well, though he had to work hard, which couldn't fail to impress Helen. Lizzie's chosen one didn't exactly displease her. She just didn't understand what could have attracted her sister. They seemed to be made of different stuff. David wasn't very talkative, even stern. He didn't understand their jokes. And Helen considered this a serious drawback. "You see, next to him, I feel," Lizzie tried to explain. "Well, like behind a stone wall." And Helen understood. Lizzie, her beloved sister, had lost her parents early. Perhaps she needed a reliable shoulder to lean on. And David, he was just that kind of person. Immediately after the wedding, David bought a large apartment in a prestigious area of the city. It turned out he had savings, plus his work decided to help a valuable employee. Lizzie enthusiastically began furnishing the new home. They went shopping, chose curtains, chandeliers, and other important interior elements. It was exciting and pleasant. Soon a child appeared in the young family, a girl, Sarah. Helen's son, Michael, was already quite grown up, almost a teenager. By the way, this wonderful little one might not have existed at all. Doctors advised Lizzie not to have children. Her heart was weak, and it was unknown how her body would react. But Lizzie believed that a family without a child was not a family, and her husband, David, dreamed of heirs. Well, they decided. The pregnancy went perfectly, despite the doctor's fears. The girl was born healthy and strong. It seemed everything had turned out wonderfully, but not quite. A year after giving birth, Lizzie's condition began to worsen. The strain on her not-so-healthy body took its toll. But Lizzie regretted nothing. She followed the doctor's recommendations, had checkups on time, and took medication. In short, she took care of her health and tried not to get nervous. The doctors say that with my indicators, the most important thing is positive emotions and no stress. Well, you have positive emotions galore. Helen smiled, looking at her sweet, funny niece. That's for sure. And I have no stress. Everything is good in our family. Helen hoped that over time she would get to know David better, become friends with him. After all, he wasn't a stranger. He was her beloved sister's husband. But he remained just as distant and silent. He would come home and, finding Helen visiting, greet her dryly and go to the bedroom. Does he not like me?" Helen asked Lizzie. "No, of course not. He's just like that. And he has a lot of work lately. He gets tired. He's rarely home. Constant delays. Business trips. What can you do? A managerial position. But at least my daughter and I lack nothing, and he's a good, kind person, takes care of us, doesn't deny us anything. But Helen knew her sister perfectly and saw Lizzie was slightly dissembling. It seemed she herself was upset. Something was wrong. Another year and a half passed. Sarah had grown up and even started going to kindergarten, and Lizzie was constantly in hospitals, less often at home. She had to visit doctors more often than usual people and carefully monitor her indicators. David provided for the family, but spent very little time with his daughter and wife. He was constantly on business trips, staying late at the office. And at home, he was distant, which Lizzie explained to her sister, and perhaps even to herself, as her husband's fatigue. But Helen saw, she understood. Something wasn't right. She felt sorry for her sister. And one day, Helen saw her suspicions confirmed with her own eyes. Yes, David was indeed cheating on her. That day, the school called her and said Michael had a fever and had been sent home. Alarmed, the mother asked her boss for time off. Who knew? Maybe her son needed help. It wasn't clear what condition he was in. That's why she was running through the train station at that moment. It was a shortcut home. And she saw them, David and his companion. Beautiful, slender, tall, with a fashionable, model-like appearance, as they said back then. They were coming out of the waiting room. He was carrying both suitcases, his and hers, and David was completely different from how Helen was used to seeing him. Enthusiastic, his eyes shining, his mouth never closed, a smile constantly on his face. He looked at his companion with some kind of adoration, and she seemed to allow herself to be admired. And Helen stopped, watched the couple go. A couple of times, David put his arm around the young woman's waist, pulled her close to whisper something in her ear, and even kissed her once, passionately and quickly, because she almost immediately playfully pushed him away. In short, there was no doubt left. And this, despite the fact that Lizzie had said her husband had gone on another business trip. But the train that had just arrived at the station was a direct route from Sochi. Apparently David and the beauty had gone not on a business trip, but to a resort to relax. Helen even stamped her foot in annoyance. The doctors had advised Lizzie to breathe the sea air, but David said he didn't have enough time. But going on vacation with his mistress, that was fine. Helen thought for a long time whether to tell Lizzie. On the one hand, her husband was deceiving her, and Helen herself would prefer to know such things, even if the truth was bitter. But Lizzie, her heart was weak. Doctors recommended avoiding stress. Wouldn't the news be too much for her? In short, Helen decided not to disturb Lizzie, but instead to talk to David frankly. For the important conversation, the woman went to her sister's husband's office. David's office was in the city centre. David was surprised to see his wife's sister at the office door. "Has something happened?" he asked. "Something has happened," Helen replied grimly, and sat down opposite David without being invited, pulling the chair closer to the desk. And the woman told David what she had seen at the train station, in detail, not missing anything. David listened calmly, without even raising an eyebrow. And then, "Well, yes, I have a woman. There are real feelings between us. I have to meet her. Well, secretly. I'm not thrilled about it myself. But why? Why? Well, sometimes it happens. Feelings cool down. I thought Lizzie was the one, the only one. I was wrong. Carol. With her, everything is different, completely. I would have told my wife long ago, but you know, her heart is weak. Lizzie's condition is unstable right now. Doctors say it's another crisis. When it passes, I'll confess everything. We'll get divorced. I'll help her get settled in life. Don't worry about that. But telling her about Carol now is equivalent to sending her to the next world. You understand that, don't you? Helen thought about it. Of course, David was right. 100% right. He was, of course, a scoundrel and a traitor for having an affair with this Carol while married. But in his own way, of course, he was protecting the mother of his child from the strongest stress, which could be detrimental to her condition. In short, they agreed with David to keep quiet for now. It was indeed much better for everyone, except for Carol herself, though she weakly believed this. At one beautiful moment, Helen still remembered that late evening, almost night, in detail. Michael was asleep. He had to get up early for school. Helen was also going to bed, but couldn't tear herself away from her favorite TV show. And then the phone rang. Anxiety immediately gripped her heart. She felt something was wrong. It was too late for a casual chat. "What is your relation to Elizabeth Miller?" a strange male voice asked on the phone. "Sister," Helen replied, growing cold with horror. She still hoped it wasn't that bad. "You need to come and pick up the child. Her husband is on a business trip, and the daughter is too young to be left alone." "What happened to Lizzie?" "You need to come," the voice repeated, "and as soon as possible." Of course, Helen called a taxi and was at her sister's apartment within 15 minutes. There was something. Too many people. Doctors. Police. They talked to Helen, told her everything. She literally slid down the wall to the floor, sat on the cold laminate, covered her face with her hands. Lizzie had had an attack. She died instantly. The doctors didn't make it in time. Little, bewildered Sarah approached Helen. Fear and incomprehension were in the girl's eyes. Looking at her, Helen understood. She had to pull herself together. Her niece needed her. "Will you take the child?" the man in uniform asked. "Of course," Helen nodded. "Of course, I'll take her." And Sarah indeed spent almost a month with Helen. David was sorting out work matters. He now had to look after his daughter. What business trips could there be? He was looking for a nanny. All this time, Sarah lived with Helen, and Michael helped his mother look after the little one, and did so with great pleasure. And then Sarah was taken by her father, who, with his characteristic seriousness, promised to visit her. "Can I come and see her?" Helen asked. "You should. I made you keys to the apartment. Come whenever you want. Sarah is so drawn to you." "Okay. Can I ask something?" "I think I even know what." David nodded. "You want to know if I told Lizzie, well, about Carol. Do you suppose the attack happened because of that?" "Yes." "Of course I didn't tell her anything." David looked at Helen with a direct, sincere gaze. "I would never, under any circumstances, have done that. We talked about it, remember? I knew it was dangerous for Lizzie, that kind of truth." Helen believed him. And then, several months after the tragedy, Helen found something among her sister's things. Sarah was truly happy that day. She didn't leave her aunt's side for a moment. When Lizzie had visited them, the niece and aunt decided to play dress-up. It was fun. The 4-year-old loved dressing up and transforming, and Helen, she admitted, did too. Both of them enjoyed the game, and they even put on music. Helen opened her sister's closet. Her heart tightened as usual at the sight of Lizzie's things, which she would never need again. They had chosen this blouse together. And Lizzie was wearing this skirt when they went to the cinema for the last time, not knowing then, of course, that it was the last time. Helen sighed and tried to reach a hat from the top shelf. The hat caught on something. She reached out her hand, and a pile of things tumbled down, right onto Helen. These were hats, scarves, and several photographs, neatly tied with a ribbon. Helen bent down to pick up the pictures and was stunned. The photographs showed David and Carol hugging and kissing. One picture looked especially romantic. David and Carol against the backdrop of a stunningly beautiful sea sunset, tanned, clearly in love. So that was it. Lizzie had found out after all. Perhaps that was why the attack happened. Helen turned over one of the pictures. There was an inscription, apparently made with a lip pencil. "Let him go. He doesn't love you anymore. He's only with you because of your daughter. He won't leave because you're sick. So take the first step." A terrible text, hurtful words. Helen imagined what it must have been like for her sister to suddenly receive this message and the note on the back of one of the pictures. She called David, who behaved very strangely. "Why are you doing this? I've already lost my wife. I haven't recovered from this grief. And now you're setting up Carol too. What do you want this for? I understand you're upset that Lizzie is gone. Maybe that's why you don't want me to be happy either, and that's why you staged this farce." "Are you kidding me? Where would I get these pictures? You don't understand anything at all. Your woman deliberately sent Lizzie to the next world. She's a terrible person. She did this." But David stuck to his story, and Helen understood. Carol, this attractive, slender woman, had enormous influence over him, which is why he believed her. Cunning, cold, and deceitful. Helen had no doubt. Carol had latched onto David only because of his apartment, his position, and his good salary. She had a goal, and she achieved it. She destroyed her main rival. Maybe she didn't want her death, but the tragedy certainly benefited her. Before, they didn't talk much, but now, not at all. Helen saw Sarah often. Usually she would take the girl for the weekend. David still worked a lot. It seemed nothing now prevented the widower and his mistress from finding personal happiness. But for some reason, the man was in no hurry to bring Carol home to his daughter. They met on neutral ground, lived together on vacation, but lived separately in ordinary life. And only about 3 years after the tragedy did David propose to his mistress and bring her home to his daughter. Sarah was already in the 1st grade then, and since Carol became David's legal wife, Helen was gradually discouraged from visiting their home. Helen, by the way, had already moved to another city by then, bought a larger apartment there, and found a good job. She even thought about taking Sarah permanently because, well, why would David need her in his new family? She wanted to become her niece's guardian, so she improved her living conditions to ensure there would be no obstacles. But unexpectedly, David stated that he would raise his daughter himself. This was strange. He had never shown particular love or affection for the girl, and he didn't look after her himself. He just hired a nanny after his wife was gone. They gradually cut off our communication. Helen looked at her now adult niece. It wasn't difficult, considering I lived in another city now. Carol, she did everything to keep you away from me, because she perfectly understood. I know everything. I know what she did to Lizzie, and probably she was afraid that I would tell you everything, that I would somehow prove my point to David, and he would kick her out. In short, it was understandable that she was uncomfortable having someone like me nearby, someone who knew all her secrets. So they pushed me away, and I tried. I tried to see you. But they were the parents, the legal guardians, and I essentially had no rights to communicate with you. And I thought Carol appeared later. Well, after Mum was gone. Maybe they delayed the wedding so you would think that later, when you grew up. No. Carol was in your father's life before the tragedy, and most likely, she was the reason for what happened to your mother. I was afraid to leave you with such a person. But what could I do? And I watched over you from afar. From the outside, everything looked fine. You wouldn't even think you were having such a hard time there. What a person she is. She didn't even spare a child. I'm not going back to them. Of course, you're not going back. You're almost 18 now. You can decide where to live yourself. Tomorrow we'll go to the university together and find out what you need to apply. Did you bring your documents with you? Yes, I only managed to pack a few things. That's nothing. We'll buy everything tomorrow. The main thing is the documents. Carol stood by the coffee machine, waiting for the massive machine to prepare her hot chocolate. She was incredibly sleepy. Little Lily had been restless all night again. Sometimes it was hard to breathe. Sometimes her chest hurt. Her granddaughter's illness, Carol's most precious treasure, was progressing. The girl couldn't play with friends, couldn't go to kindergarten. Her daughter Chloe. She was clearly not ready for such difficulties as a sick child. She freaks out, throws tantrums, and even gets angry at her daughter, who is not at fault at all. It was Chloe and her useless boyfriend who made the baby in a drunken haze. And then, during pregnancy, the future young mother didn't exactly restrain herself. She smoked and indulged in beer. Carol tried to keep an eye on her daughter, but it's impossible to watch an adult 24 hours a day. People were right. They had indeed spoiled Chloe. And Carol just wanted her daughter to be happy. Numerous activities, gifts, surprises, birthdays. Carol invested all available resources in her child. Chloe had no household chores because her mother believed her girl would have plenty of time to work in life later. David? He didn't interfere much in the upbringing of his younger daughter, completely entrusting this matter to his wife. And besides, he was always away from home, earning money to support the family. Carol was completely confident. You can't spoil someone with love. Childhood whims would pass with age, and her daughter would grow up strong, a self-respecting person. Only Chloe eventually stopped studying altogether because she was used to doing only what she wanted. She dropped out of school in the 10th grade, declared she would never go to university, not even to a commercial faculty where almost everyone gets in if you just pay, because she was tired of studying and wanted to enjoy life to the fullest. Chloe got involved with a bad crowd and often came home drunk in the morning. Carol couldn't do anything with her unruly daughter. Neither could David. He didn't know how to deal with Chloe at all. He had never really been involved in her upbringing, although he loved her very much. He transferred money, bought gifts. And then something terrible happened. David was in a car accident on the highway while driving home from another business trip, and Carol was left alone. However, she was quick, and the apartment and David's accounts went only to her and Chloe. The formalities for this property cost a lot of money and effort, but now it paid off fully. As for Sarah, she had been living in another city for a long time, far away, a severed branch. Carol wasn't particularly interested in her fate. Neither was David. They only knew that Sarah had indeed gotten into medical school as she dreamed. No other information. Sarah did not maintain relations with her parents. Probably she communicated with her aunt, with Helen. Well, that was good. Carol was quite satisfied with this. The main thing was that David's apartment and money in his accounts went only to them. And then Chloe got pregnant by one of her perpetually drunk admirers. And Lily was born, weak, pale. In the maternity hospital, she was diagnosed with a serious heart defect, one with which people live at best until 7 or 8 years old if they don't have surgery. And little Lily was already 5. Of course, Carol put all her efforts into her granddaughter's rehabilitation and treatment. She herself was surprised by the strength of feelings she felt for the little one. She once dreamed that money would provide them with a happy life without hardship and saving. But it turned out differently. Everything went into Lily's rather expensive, supportive treatment. The girl had undergone several surgeries. This only slightly improved the situation, but didn't fundamentally solve the problem. It was scary to think what could happen to her granddaughter. Even Chloe, usually carefree, frivolous, and thinking only of herself, even she seemed to understand that the jokes were over and tried to care for her daughter as much as possible. But the main burden of care still lay on Carol's shoulders. In their city, everyone refused further treatment for Lily. There were no such capabilities or necessary specialists there. So Carol, Chloe, and Lily went to Moscow. They were advised to go to a children's surgery center where, it seemed, almost wizards worked, helping even in the most severe cases. Getting an appointment was difficult. The queue was long, but Carol managed to get through. However, at the appointment, they were disheartened. The queue was huge because people came from all over the country, and most patients' situations were as urgent as Lily's. No one could be moved ahead, and by then, the girl's condition could worsen so much that no one would take her to the operating table. They prescribed medication for the little one for now, but no one could say if it would help. Carol drank hot chocolate, leaning her back against the light hospital wall. Nearby, on a couch, sat a bewildered Chloe, with Lily sleeping on her lap, unaware of the seriousness of the situation. And Carol could barely hold back tears of helplessness and despair. She could do nothing more. And suddenly, "Oh, Miller, dear," one orderly said to another. Everyone gave up on him. His heart was full of holes. Well, that's what the doctors said. Hopeless. But she operated at night in her free time, didn't leave the table for 5 hours, and saved the boy. He'll live now, and he'll be completely healthy. A miracle. Miller is a pediatric cardiac surgeon sent by God. The other orderly nodded in agreement. And a good person. We need more people like that in the world. Excuse me, where is Dr. Sarah Miller's office? Carol rushed to the orderlies and asked them to show her to this doctor's office. She had almost no doubt. No, it seemed too fantastic, but still. Sarah was finishing another report when a woman from the past suddenly appeared at her office door. The one who had once brought her so much pain, caused her so many problems. Carol. And next to her, holding a sleeping child in her arms, stood Chloe. Sarah recognized her sister too, although she had last seen her when she was still a young student. For some reason, she felt fear, and also dislike, contempt, disgust, but also surprise, of course. And why? Why had the past found her at that moment, when everything in her life had just settled down and improved? Carol began to speak. She cried, asked for forgiveness, and seemed to sincerely repent for her behavior back then. What happened? Perhaps it's a boomerang, punishment for what I did to you. But this child, a child not at fault for anything. You are our last hope, Sarah. Take her for surgery, otherwise she won't live to see her turn. You do this sometimes, I know. You take difficult children in your off hours. I can't ask you this after everything, but I'm asking. I have nowhere else to turn. Sarah looked at the little girl in her sister's arms. Her niece, as it turned out. And to her surprise, she suddenly realized that she no longer felt resentment. And the dislike for these two people had also evaporated somewhere. Before Sarah were people. Unhappy, frightened people who needed help. And a child. A seriously ill child. Sarah asked for Lily's documents. She needed to understand what they were dealing with. Carol readily pulled a thick folder from her bag. Lab results, ultrasound reports, scans. Yes, the situation was indeed complex, and brooked no delay. But Sarah knew she could handle it. She had dealt with such cases before. Of course, she would have to sacrifice her free time again. But that was such a small price compared to a child's life that it wasn't even worth mentioning. Sarah had gone into medicine to save people after all. This was her calling, her dream. Some tests will need to be redone, Sarah said. And don't worry, everything will be all right.